because the imagery in the Rider Waite is super, super powerful and can really help us understand a lot. So blend those together to really arrive at a point where we're that whole person. We heal the wounding through the North Node from the South Node. And then we take the overabundance in the North Node and we temper it with the South Node. Because there's still good parts to the South Node. You know, this is not all bad. Just like yours is not all bad with the Three of Swords. While we want to say this is bad, it's not. People don't like this card, but it has value. There are times in our lives where we need to intellectually process what's going on in our emotions and say, hey, that's not actually true. I can see the reality of this situation.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Mindful Mastery. I'm Vanessa Ooms, your host, and in today's episode with Kim Charlson, we go on many journeys talking about everything from tarot and astrology to how the lunar nodes in your birth chart affect you personally and professionally, right into channeling and connecting with your spirit guides. So check out the timestamps to skip around to the chapters that might interest you, or if you want to be here for the whole episode with us, just listen on in. So in this episode, we kind of skipped over the preliminary banter and went right into reading my birth chart. And I wanted to share this with you all because we can all learn from each other and the insights that are gained from astrology and from our charts. So let's get into it.
This system is from the Golden Dawn, and they developed a way of looking at tarot and astrology complementary to each other, which is why there's so many symbols in the Rider Waite Smith deck, is because it is based off of astrology and it has to do with the Deccan system. So you're going to look at your chart and then look for either your south or north node, and then look at where it falls within the sign. So if it goes counterclockwise around when you're counting. If it's in the first 10 degrees, it's in the first second. If it's in the second 10-degree segment, it's the second one. So the third degree, it's in the third one.
Okay, let's take a look, and I can blur out my personal info after.
Perfect. Yeah, okay. So looking at this, your north node is in Aries at 15 degrees, and then your south node is in Libra at 15 degrees, and they are exactly 180 degrees apart from each other. Looking at your chart here. So this puts you in Aries 2 and Libra 2. So let me look at my chart and tell you what those two are. So you are moving from Libra to the north node of Aries. So you're moving from 2 of Swords. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong one. 3 of Swords to 3 of Wands is where you're moving from. So let me go through my deck and find those cards and we'll look at them together, because looking at the cards themselves has some like really interesting information about our journey in our businesses and how it affects us and where we're at. So we've got the 3 of Wands here. So this is going to be your Aries energy because it's fire. So Aries pairs with Wands. And then we're looking at 3 of Swords is the other one. Which is not a very happy card, right? So we're moving from Libra, which is Swords in this case. And we're moving from this energy, which is a very sorrowful energy, generally speaking. And in your chart, which house is it in? I forgot to look at that when we had it up. Oh, you used Placidus. Ooh, I am a whole sign girly. So when I look at my chart, I use the whole sign system, so that way every sign has a full house with it. So like if you look at Leo, where your ascendant starts, that 12 is huge versus 1 is very small. And that's because this system of houses puts it so that way your ascendant is on the horizon, basically. Like everything that's up above is the sky and everything down below is like the part of the sky we can't see in your chart. So the Placidus system puts the ascendant right at the horizon. The reason why I use whole sign is when I was getting into astrology, I was like, you know what? I don't know which sign system, like which one to use. So I decided I'm going to look through 15 years of my charts and take both of my charts and take a look at them and decide, am I going to use whole sign or Placidus depending on how the events of my life played out and like what areas of my life that they were. Because in our astrology, where you have the different houses, that's the area of your life where it affects you the most. And by
Okay.
looking at that, that's how I decided to use whole sign. So it works for me. There are other people for Placidus that it works better, but that's why I use whole sign. And when I'm teaching in my class about the Decans, we use the whole sign system for that reason. So that will also change. If you change your data, it'll change it. So scroll up a little bit and hit edit birth data and settings on the left.
Okay.
And then you're going to hit extended settings, house system, aspects, orbs, and change the house system in the drop down to whole sign.
Oh.
And then hit calculate or redraw, whichever one. They both work.
Okay.
All right. So now you can see that the houses are equal to the signs themselves. So that moves it. So it was in your fourth, Libra was in your fourth house before, and now it is in your third house, which changes the area of your life that it affects. And I will absolutely admit, I do not have the houses memorized. Like I wish I did. My brain does not retain that much information.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So the fourth house is, so it moved from, if you're looking at Placidus, home, family, and roots, and it's moved into communication, learning, and siblings. Now that we're looking at the third house. And because things are opposite, these two energies between these two cards are actually the same energy. They're two polar opposite interpretations. So if we think of these in our chart, I like to use the Vedic astrological version of thinking about nodes is that if we're moving from, say you were in Aries South Node and moving to Libra, this doesn't seem like a place you really want to move to. Like, that doesn't seem very fun, right? So in Vedic astrology, we view the South and North nodes as the tail and the head of a dragon. They have to be combined together to be a complete being. And so
Oh.
we blend them together to get that complete being. So where you're moving from is a sense of in your communication, there's probably a lot of like wounding around your heart in particular, and a
Yeah.
lot of hurt of like not being heard. You may have had difficult relationships with your siblings, since if you have any, since that's in your chart. But in thinking about your business, a lot of modeled behaviors and conditioning is probably coming up. So thinking about your own business and how you've run your business over the years, have you felt like sometimes people don't understand you or you have to over communicate, or that your communication failed to work in such a way that it hurt emotionally, really difficult?
Yeah. I'd say that in my business and in my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I've,
And they
yeah, I've
directly
really
affect
had to
each
learn
other
that.
because we're entrepreneurs. While this chart in its different houses has to do with specific areas, you would have seen like the modeling come up specifically in communication, how your relationships with your siblings worked, probably. But that's going to affect like how you communicate in your business, for example, or like my nodes are in the second and the eighth house. The eighth house is my north node, and that is all about death, the occult, transformation, other people's money. That's where like we can see a direct correlation with other people's money. But for me, that's not how it's played out. It's played out in the death and the occult. So my journey went from being in the house of self-worth in two as a Virgo. In the Deccan is the nine of Pentacles, which is this one. This is a strong, independent business lady. She knows her stuff. She has gotten her bag, but it comes really slowly. So you may be able to see there's a snail in this bottom corner right here. It is slow
Yeah.
going progress. It took me about 7 years before I like really made it in my business. And it comes with a lot of control. So you can see like she's got this bird right here is a falcon, and it has a hood over its head. And she is in this really uncomfortable position. She's got her body turned. She has her hand like this with a bird on it. She's standing like this. It's really uncomfortable, right? Why is she doing that? She wants to look a really specific way to the viewer. So while she's successful, it comes at a price. It comes at a cost. And her self-worth, because it's in my second house, is all tied up in that. I had to have a lot of control in my business. So in my journey of like how I got to where I am now, I had a really successful marketing agency. And when it got to the point where I was making like $30,000 a month and had a full team, everything had to be just so. And if it wasn't, it was absolute chaos. And like I would wake up first thing in the morning, grab my phone at 4 a.m. and be checking my email so I could get a hop on the day. Because if I didn't, it was going to get the jump on me. And that was how I functioned for a number of years. I was working like in the beginning, like 80, 90-hour weeks. Even when I got staff, they're supposed to be able to delegate. It just increased. The problems just kept getting bigger, which I think a lot of entrepreneurs can resonate with that. And when we think about this, it's Virgo energy, right? It's very of the mind versus where you're at. This is really like the intellect hurting you. While it's emotional because it has to do with your heart, the swords are all about the intellect. It's all about knowledge. So knowledge in particular is what's causing emotional harm in your third house, which has to do with communication. So you probably have like a lot of habits and conditioning in your life that has impacted not only the way that you communicate with people, but also like the way that you have your messaging in your business, the way that you're showing up, of feeling like it has to be like you have to find the intellectual path forward so that way it doesn't hurt for you to share your messaging. Does that resonate?
It does.
Yeah. So what you're working towards is the Three of Wands, is the opposite energy. So the Three of Wands is like the second decan is kind of like where the energy is like it's in a happy place. It's not coming in hot like in the first decan. And in the third decan, it can be too much. That's where the tens reside. So like the Ten of Swords, ooh, we do not want that one. That's getting stabbed, right? So the two is actually like a decent place to be, but because it's in the beginning of the sign, it can also be a little shaky ground. Like we don't have good foundations. So we see this guy, he's standing on top of a hill, and you may not be able to see, but there's some little tiny boats here. And he's watching like his boats go off to explore because he's wearing a pretty nice outfit, right? He's got like 3-4 different colors, which the more colors in the tarot generally denotes like someone of higher stature. But he's not, in the other cards in the Aries series, he's not wearing a hat, which I think is really important because Aries is working towards being the emperor. It's complementary card in Aries, and he wears a big crown, right? This guy just has a little tiny headband going on. So he's working on sending off ships to find out what else is out there. He's in the exploratory mode. And he communicates, since this is about the opposite of your style of communication, how he's communicating is by letting others communicate for him. The ships are doing the work of communicating versus him trying to communicate himself. He's sending things off and trusting that they will get there and that it will work out, and they will bring back the messages. They will bring back the trade route bounty that's going to come back, that's going to make him an even wealthier merchant. So that's in your 9th house, which is the house of travel, higher learning, and philosophy, which can be a little hard, like looking at this, how they oppose each other. But it's basically like what you believe and what you explore is what we can think about that. Whereas the 3rd house is how you think and how you speak, right? So we're shifting into a more philosophical approach about beliefs instead of one based on learned experience that comes from this card, which is very painful for you. You're learning how to let your work speak for you. You're sending your work off into the world, and your work is doing the speaking for you instead of you having to figure out exactly the right way to figure it out on your own. So that's how I would analyze these two. But like, your intuition is more important than how I'm telling you how to interpret these. So in my new mini course that I made, it has reflection exercises that ask you to go through these and look at these, look at them from different angles, and really look at the iconography without really understanding what the tarot means, but just looking at the imagery, because the imagery in the Rider Waite is super, super powerful and can really help us understand a lot.
Fascinating. And I feel like that's exactly where I'm at right now in my business is, yeah, starting to just let my work kind of speak for itself and bring the people, magnetize the people in more
Mm-hmm.
than me trying to go out, because also in human design I'm a projector. It's
Oh,
so it kind of it makes a lot of
that
sense
resonates. Yeah.
rather than me trying to, you know, go get go after it, go get it. It's it's not really my nature. It's more my nature to invite and be in receptive mode, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's definitely what this merchant guy is, just sitting on the hill. He's got his wands. He's in a good place, and he's letting the ships go do the work for him and then bring it back. So for you, learning how to let the riches come back to you through just trusting that your work is enough will really help you kind of heal the things that are inside of over intellectualizing to find the best way to communicate.
I really feel that in my heart right now.
Mhm. Yeah, and it blows people's minds when they look at these. Personally, like I'd already been through my journey through it and was like, "Oh, this is so revealing. Like I can understand how this happened." Of like I had thankfully, and I have pretty nice cards. Some of my friends that I've talked through this with did not have nice cards. So I'll find my other one as well and we can look at mine too, just as another example for people. But
Yeah.
it can be like a really interesting experience to look at these. Like a friend of mine, I was looking at her chart because I was like, is this like it's relevant for me? Is it relevant for other people? And she had the Six of Pentacles, which is a guy standing there and he's got the scales of justice and he's doling out stuff. And then there's some beggars in front of him. And the opposite card is the Six of Cups, which is this. They usually think it's a dwarf, but it can also be viewed as a child or an adult that has like childlike innocence, that dwarves tend to represent that in the tarot. As the sibling of someone who is a smaller person, that I have a dwarf as a brother, I can honestly say that it's a very accurate representation most of the time that my brother at least has a very childlike innocence to him that adults just don't have, and like a playfulness. And it's this dwarf or older child giving a cup with flowers to a younger child and them sharing this moment of like mutual connection through emotion, because the cups are emotion, versus the pentacles are material gain, material wealth. And for her, it brought up all of these worthiness wounds as well, of she just had this like complete and utter just rising of all of this emotion that came up that needed to be processed. And it was tough, but then she was really excited because she's an EFT coach. So she was like, this is amazing. All this stuff I get to tap on now and really heal it and get through it. It's going to be so good. But it can be, looking at this can be a difficult process because it brings up this wounding that we want to ignore or that we don't realize is wounding because it's based off of modeling behaviors and conditioning we think is normal. And I like to think of conditioning as we think this is how we should act or how the world should be, but that's not the truth.
Oh my
It's a
goodness.
should.
Yeah.
I love blowing people's mind. So these are
Well,
mine
oh
too.
my gosh.
I've got the
Okay.
Nine of Pentacles that we looked at, and then my opposite sign is the Nine of Cups. And this is in my eighth house. So this has to do with the occult. So in my journey, I went from, as I talked about, having this marketing agency. And I thought that was all there was. I was so conditioned to believe that the world had to work this way. I was like, I'm going to get into spirituality because it'll help me surrender and just accept that this is it. This is the only way that I can exist in my life. And as I got into spirituality, I started to figure out, hey, this is really happy and joyful. Because you look at this guy, he's got a big smile on his face. He's a happy fella. And he's wealthy. He's got 9 cups. Look at his giant hat. He's just rocking. But he takes up a lot of space. I mean, we got to admit, this is made by a dead white guy. He is made. He is taking up space. He's happy with where he's at. This is called the wishes fulfilled card. And where it comes from is out of alignment with the universe. His emotional intellect state is aligned with what the universe is asking him to be. He's in his ownership of that. And that's where I ended up getting in my eighth house. I started talking with spirits on the other side. I learned how to be a channeler. I started voice channeling and letting them speak through me through a huge state of surrender. I definitely achieved my goal of learning how to surrender. But I was so blissed out all the time. by it. It was such an amazing experience to bring just this pure love and emotion from the other side to people. But then eventually I started to feel this tug back to my Nine of Pentacles. And that's where I'm at now, is where I'm starting to combine those two together. Because I think, personally, I think that's where our evolution goes. Because if you're like looking at Gemini and Sagittarius 3, those two cards are horrible. You go from either the 10 of Swords to the 10 of Wands. You're either overthinking everything to the point it kills you, or you're carrying everything to the point it kills you. Pick one. So blend those together to really arrive at a point where we're that whole person. We heal the wounding through the North Node from the South Node. And then we take the overabundance in the North Node and we temper it with the South Node. Because there's still good parts to the South Node. You know, this is not all bad. Just like yours is not all bad with the Three of Swords. While we want to say this is bad, it's not. People don't like this card, but it has value. There are times in our lives where we need to intellectually process what's going on in our emotions and say, hey, that's not actually true. I can see the reality of this situation, and my emotions are playing tricks on me. So I think all the cards have value, and we can't say, I only want to go from the North to the South Node, or from the South to the North Node, and that's it. And I've completed my journey. So if you also think about past lives, you're just banging back and forth between those two cards, because you get to one, you master it, and then you get to go back to the other one, back and forth and back and forth.
Interesting. I like your analogy of them being opposite ends of a dragon and both part of a whole being.
Yeah.
And kind of that works with the idea of the middle path and finding that balance in between. Because, yeah, like you say, intellectualizing can have its purpose, but you don't want to overthink everything and overthink everything that you're doing to the point where it's paralyzing. Finding the balance.
Yeah, and for you, so it's the balance between will and intellect in different ways. Versus for me, it's the balance between emotion and material possessions and material success. Like that's how these energies compare together. It's always pentacles and cups, wands and swords in the chart. They always go that way.
Interesting. Earth and water, air and fire.
Yep.
Okay.
Which, when you combine them, you need earth and water together to create growth. One or the other, you can't bloom a seed. That's what gets to my favorite word, is that we have fecundity when we have earth and water together. And when we have air and fire together, you can't have a fire without oxygen. It'll drown itself out. But too much air, it blows out the fire. So when we get those elements in balance, that's where we can find our good, like, nice point. And I love that you used the word the middle path, because this does come from the Golden Dawn system, which, you know, we have to admit doesn't really leave a lot of room for women. But their big thing is the tree of life, and finding the middle path in the tree of life. That's how we can achieve different things. Now, I am not a Hermeticist whatsoever. I just thought this was a really great way to look at this. And it has been such an educational process. So for the people who want to learn more about this, so I have my mini course that's available. But if you're really into esoteric stuff, the people to look at are Austin Coppock, who has a book about it called 36 Faces. It is so hard to get a copy of it. It is out of print, and supposedly he's going to be releasing a new version soon. So I would sign up for his email list. And then T. Susan Chang, she took what's called a Deccan walk, which is going through, because all of these coordinate with the time of year. So Aries 1 is the spring equinox. So all the energies also have to do with the time of year. So like right now we're in Libra, and we're in Libra 1. That is, trying to remember, Two of Swords is Libra 1.
Okay.
Which is the woman with her arms crossed in front of her and she's blindfolded. Her mirror card is Justice, which is also the Libra card.
Right.
We get what we sow, right? And that's right. What's happening right now, we're in harvest season in the Northern Hemisphere. We get what you reap what you sow. It's really what the Justice card is about. She's not blind. Her eyes are open. She can see everything. And that's kind of the difference between the Two of Swords. She's a card of peace. Most people read it as a card of I'm going to ignore what's going on. And that can be a very Libra energy of like, I'm just not going to deal with this. I want to keep the peace. But what it is also a card of trust at the same time. She is trusting while she's got her arms up protected. She's also blindfolded. If someone else had a sword, that's not really a good way to sit. Like you're gonna, you can think about Star Wars where they're, blindfolded trying to combat stuff with their intuition. It's kind of the same deal. Is she using her intuition instead of her intellect? Like what's going on behind that blindfold? There's a lot of questions we can ask through these. So through the Golden Dawn system in Hermeticism, it illuminated a lot for me. Now, I know the people who may listen to this who are true Hermeticists will be like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And I fully and totally agree with that. This is just my little dabbling in it. But the Deccan walk allows you to go through the different Deccans for the time of year and look at each card. So people who are really into tarot and astrology will do that. They'll take a year, they'll start on the vernal equinox, and they'll go through, and about every 10 days is a new card. And they'll go through, and it's all 36 minor arcana, excluding the aces, because the aces are pure energy, so they're not incorporated into it. And it's an interesting way. So that's what T. Susan Chang, that's what she did. She wrote her personal observations of doing this Deccan walk, and it's available on her website for free. But I just recently bought her book, and it is so good. Just so good.
That would be so fascinating. There's so many layers to this.
You could spend a lifetime on it, honestly.
A lifetime. Like, even I love that you brought to our attention the trust and the intuition from the Two of Swords, because that card kind of gets a bad rap too about, oh, you have a decision to make, or you're feeling conflicted, but there's just so much more to it. And even the colors in the cards and the little symbols, I had no idea how much it was tied into astrology.
Yeah. And each card has a title within the Golden Dawn system as well. That card is known as the Lord of Peace. So each one of these minor arcana cards you can view as like a snapshot, as a picture in time of like what happens after this snapshot is going to change. But in this one little tiny moment of time, this is what's occurring. And each different card has a title. So it could be like the Five of Wands is the Lord of Strife. We can also see that as striving instead of just strife. And that comes from T. Susan Chang, wrote about that I just read that one this morning, and it blew my mind of thinking about this card of like the names sometimes are at odds with how we would interpret them. And so we have to think more about them, feel into it as well. So it's simultaneously an intellectual process as well as an intuitive process together, combined, because like the Ten of Swords, I didn't really understand that card until I realized the iconography of he has his hand in the papal gesture. It's about Thomas Becket, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered by the King's men. So there's a lot of layers to tarot. The more that we study, the more it helps us realize these different things. And then when you put it to the wheel of the year, it's like, whoa, it's a next level of realizations.
But I can see how this study would kind of take you out of that black and white thinking and kind of get you into a more balanced space. While you were talking, I kept seeing the yin yang symbol.
Yeah.
And just bringing both and into your thinking, and kind of, yeah, just breaking out of it's either this or that. It's both and. It's south and north node. Wow. You're blowing my mind right now.
I'm so glad. I mean, like, honestly, this has been an interesting experience. And this is like, I'm one of those people that does like a deep dive into something when I get into it, because I've only been working with this for about like 4 weeks at this point now. That my spirit guides, they kept saying to me all the time, you reap what you sow, you reap what you sow. I'm like, what is this about, guys? I'm like, is it about me? And they're like, no. And they show me the Justice card over and over and over. And I'm like, okay, what is this? It feels like it has to do with harvest. And that's where I connected it together. And then I was like, we're in eclipse portal right now. How is this connected? And I really see the lunar nodes as our personal eclipse in our charts. And I think that, we have the collective dealing with the eclipse, because we're in one right now as we're recording this, that we're about smack dab in the middle between our lunar and our solar eclipse. But in your chart, the lunar nodes are actually the meeting point between the plane of the moon's travel and the plane of the sun's travel. And that's where eclipses occur. That's what creates the nodes. So it's kind of like your personal eclipse that you're going to go through throughout your entire life. Bless the people who were born on a solar or lunar eclipse that actually have that energy in theirs, because it's got to be so powerful. And their soul was like, yep, we're doing this lifetime.
I would love to hear your interpretation of the magician card, because I was walking around yesterday and my guides were like, you're the magician, you're the magician. And I kept seeing the card, but I don't know a whole lot about this. And I did some internet searching, but I would love to hear your take.
Yeah, let me find it in my deck. Yeah, so what I would say, like, number one, you're definitely, most people in spiritual practices that do channeling or that are bringing things through, energetically speaking, are going to resonate with the magician card. So let's take a look at him right now. So number one, he's holding up a scepter, not a wand, okay? Because that's on the table down here. Most people get that a little bit confused, but we've got all four of the elements on the table. So we got the pentacle, the coal, the cup, the sword, and the wand are here. He's holding what looks very different, but he's holding this up basically as a lightning rod. Is how like I would interpret it. But then he's also pointing his hand downward. And he is looking straight at the viewer of the card, which is pretty rare. The tarot cards don't usually do that. They're usually either have something like the Two of Swords could look straight at you, but she's got a blindfold blocking her from the viewer. Most of the cards are like turned to the side, or they're interacting with someone else on the card. They're not looking straight at the viewer, which I think is really important for this card because it's the first card in the series. This is making a direct connection with you when you're using the tarot. You are in the act of being, in part, the magician when you're using the tarot, because what you're doing is bringing through intuition through the lightning rod. And then you are grounding this down into physical form. That's the big part of like where those echo to each other. And then we've also got on the card all this, verdancy of, you've got a lot of roses and some sort of like lily on there as well. Okay. And then you've got them hanging down up here. That's a lot of money when you really think about it. If you ever had to buy flowers for your wedding, they're so expensive even now. And we think about, he's bringing through this energy, and he's also connected. Anytime we see this symbol, is like, it's the lemniscate, and it shows like when one is really connecting the intuitive and the material world together, is my reading of it. It appears in the strength card above the woman's head who's holding the lion, which is really the uniting of the ego, which is represented by the lion, with will, but also like she's using her intuition, that she's trusting that the lion's not going to eat her. Why would we do that? That's not a logical process. So that's one of the card. The other one that it shows up in is the Two of Pentacles, but the juggler is holding the two pentacles, and it's making a loop as the lemniscate between them. Roses have a particular meaning, and I bet that the lilies do. Now that I'm looking at it, that's something I myself am going to go look up, like what's the meaning, spiritual meaning. Probably going to be something to do with rebirth, I have a feeling, because lilies in particular are associated with the arrival of Christ after his resurrection. That's why we have peace lilies around Easter. And we do have to keep in mind that although many of us do not really know a lot of Christianity and the foundations of it, like I was not raised memorizing Bible verses by any means. Me neither. These people were. The people who made this deck were. And we have to keep that in mind, that a lot of Christianity is in this in a way that we can't ignore it. Just in the same way that it has Kabbalah in it. It has ancient Jewish traditions in it. It also has ancient Egyptian traditions in it. The Hermeticists basically cherry-picked all the different traditions, combined them together. They were like the comparative literature people of mysticism. They took it all and they formulated one thing. So while we would want to, because of for many of us, the wounding of Christianity is so present in many of us, when we're looking at the tarot, we really can't ignore it. We have to work with those wounds that we've got because it's there. It is absolutely in the imagery all the time. So that's kind of how I would read it. So if you are, oh, and the other thing that's around his belt, I'm not sure if you can make that out. It's actually a snake. It's not just a belt, which is the Ouroboros. Oh, dang.
Wow.
I have a giant crystal next to me. And I just hit my elbow on it. Like, look at this baby.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's how to help me always bring through the energy that needs to come through my throat. This is my little buddy that I always have next to me when I'm doing things like this or when I'm channeling. But the Ouroboros is the beginning and the end, right? Is the snake that eats its tail. So there's a lot of meaning in this of someone who has done a lot of studies, but also someone who is bringing through energy from the unseen, from source, and bringing it down into physical manifestation. So how does that resonate with you?
It resonates big time for me, especially because, yeah, a lot of like the messages that I put out on my YouTube channel are channels. It's just I get the message and I put it out, and it's kind of always been that way. But in particular, when I was getting that message, you are the magician, I was meditating before this walk and actually had a visitation from somebody's loved one in spirit. It's very clear this is a new thing that's been happening for me. So I feel like that magician message is extra pertinent.
Yeah.
Extra relevant for me right now.
And I honor people that do mediumship so much that during my studies in channeling and learning how to be a voice channeler, I dabbled in some mediumship and was like, no, this is not for me. I cannot do this. It was too emotionally heavy for me to do. Like when I brought through someone's cat was the first time that I did it. And it was so emotional. It was just like tears streaming down my face the whole time. And I have such a deep reverence for people that do mediumship, which is rare for channelers. A lot of channelers, especially older ones, there's like a big beef that I learned about from my mentors between channelers and mediums that I think that our age bracket probably doesn't have, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
That a lot of older channelers see mediums as like, well, you're getting information from someone who is recently deceased. They don't really know a whole lot. They have their own like human stuff that's still hanging out that needs to be resolved. We can't really trust them. Whereas mediums are like, you don't even know what you're talking to. You can't prove it. There's no evidence for, especially evidential mediums. And so there's this dichotomy between channelers and mediums of like, I don't believe what you're doing and you don't believe what I'm doing. And I think it's so interesting. But again, it's just about that blending between those two, because I think both sides of the unseen have so much to offer us when we can really look at them.
They really do. That's so interesting. I had no idea that there was a beef.
Yeah, I think it probably comes from, previous generations of a lot of hurt of like, I think our generation of like millennials and Gen Zs, maybe a little bit of Gen Xers are more apt to believe, even though we can't see things. And I think it comes to the fact that we have been challenged to live in a non-Newtonian way. And we're getting into that quantum, like just from a science perspective, when they're teaching kids in school, they're teaching them about quantum now. That's going to change their mindsets, right? They're not going to think about, if I can't measure it, it can't exist. Whereas in quantum, there's things we can't measure, but we know they're there, or like we measure them. And in that moment, it's where we're measuring it. And then it's over here. It exists because we're measuring it, is kind of a lot of the concepts in quantum mechanics in science. And when you have that mindset from a science perspective, which is what our world emphasizes so much, it's going to change the way that you approach the unseen. Just because I can't see it, just because I'm experiencing it through senses that like science says can be manipulated, it has the opportunity to see it more as real. Whereas Newtonian, it's got to be in front of you. It's got to be there. It's got to be measurable. And I think that shift in our thinking is really going to open up people to so many more opportunities in working with different energies, because we no longer think about them as it has to be physically present with us. And even like right now, you're not physically present with me, but we're having this connection. And when you grow up in that world, that changes your perspective about how we can interact with each other.
It's an exciting time to be alive.
It really is. I love it. Not without its challenges, but I think it's also because I grew up like chronically on the internet from a very young age because my dad worked in computers. And so we had a T1 connection. We were like the first people in our state to get one.
Wow.
And I can remember, and this goes back to like why I obviously opened a digital marketing agency that's like we specialized in search marketing. There used to be this like online scavenger hunt called Lycos Cyber Safari. And that's like one of the first experiences that I have on the internet that like very few people have ever heard of. But you'd use this search engine called Lycos to try to find facts about like animals. And then it would be like, here's your next clue. And it would take you to like somebody else's website. And this is in the day when websites were like really bright pink with just purple lettering and like random things on them. And they would just start randomly playing music and things like that. And that was like my first experiences with the internet. I was probably like 9 or 10 years old at the time. And that informed, like, I can see that so much in my life, like how that informed my modeling behaviors and my conditioning of, I didn't see the internet as a scary place. It wasn't a place where like I was going to get scammed. It was a place of with a wealth of information that was just at my fingertips. And that really changed a lot for me growing up because most of my peers, because I'm 37, how old am I? 36? Like forget how old I am anymore. Most of them didn't get internet until they were in high school. And by that point, people were like, you shouldn't buy stuff online. Like you're going to get scammed. Whereas I was like, Amazon, let's go. Like I remember buying things on Amazon when it was just books because I thought it was amazing. And obviously, you know, we have a responsibility of how we work with this stuff too. And that goes for the unseen. We also have a responsibility just in the same way that we have a responsibility with the way that we are interacting with things online, we do when we're interacting with the unseen as well, or when we're processing these energies through us. And what I'm super passionate about at the moment, and goodness knows my energy is always moving and changing because I'm a manifestor, human design. So it's just I get really excited and then I move on. Because I can see how this is affecting us as business owners so much. Whether you're in the spiritual space or not, it doesn't really matter. This stuff is affecting us all the time. We have to change our thinking processes to undo the conditioning and modeling behaviors of Newtonian worldview, get into the quantum worldview, change how we're leading, change how we're interacting with each other. And that's really where the new age is going to come in. And I really like the Gene Keys in particular. I'm a Gene Key girly versus a human design girly mostly. And he talks about the synastry that we're going to get into and the synarchy, which is in a business sense, which is I think his best example is through that, is instead of having a hierarchy within a business of like you have the boss and everybody down below, maybe you have a middle manager in between, and it's this really strict hierarchy. It's more of what we see in creative spaces. There is someone that's like a creative director and they're helping direct it. And they will ultimately say, yeah, we're going to go with this or not. But they're enabling the work of the other people to produce the highest work that they can, producing an environment in which that they can produce really good work. And how businesses interact with each other in that is not a hierarchy of vendor and the vendor relationship of it's more about collaborating together to produce really good results mutually. And I think that's where we're going to get to. And I think that not to say the big P word, but the pandemic really changed how we approach business. We can't deny that. And I think that that's where people are starting to see these things changing. And we have this moment in time right now where we can either choose to give into the conditioning of the collective self node and giving into that modeling that came before and just keep repeating those patterns, or we can decide to try something different and blend it in. Because if we go too far to the North Node, it's too much too soon, people are going to be upset. It's going to be chaos. We got to blend them together, take the good parts of both.
Right. So is that kind of the energy of the age of Aquarius that we're moving into? Is that more collaborative, connective approach?
Yeah. And I would say my understanding of it is informed a lot by working with my spirit guides and asking them a lot of questions about where we're headed And I gathered with a group of 6 other channelers at the beginning of this year, and we did like a reading for the world for the year of like, tell us what's going to happen. And it now at the end, towards the end of the year, I can see, oh, that really played out the way that we thought it was going to. It was very interesting. And it was about that there was going to be a lot of fire. There was going to be famines. There was going to be waters rising, all these like horrible things, which are part of our reality. We cannot deny that. That things happen to good people for absolutely no reason, as far as we can like logically see. And it's becoming more and more chaotic in our opinions, whether or not that's factually true in some ways on the individual level. It's all about individual perception. But they also said we would be given a choice as a collective. Are we going to take this new energy that's going to come in, and are we going to choose to work with this energy or not? Because I'm a firm believer in free will. I don't think that everything's fated and we have to, this is it. This is the only choice you get to make. I think that we're here in a world of choice. And so we get to make choices. So we get to choose, do we want to work with this energy or not? And there's going to be some of us that choose to work with it and some that don't. Those are the people who are going to stick in the collective South Node. They are not ready to work with this new energy. But it is an opposite pole. We have to keep that in mind. It is very opposite. It also has its own same problems. They look different. This is when my spirit guides decide to show up.
Right.
For those that are not watching the video, my reactions just show up sometimes on my computer where it gives a thumbs up. Even though my hands weren't really on the camera, it does that pretty often. But we have this choice. Are we going to work with this energy? And what was coming through, and each one of the different channelers got about the same answers. It's this very divine feminine energy. It's this sparkly, loving, joyful, blissed out kind of energy that's available to us. And I think it's interesting, I don't like to bring politics too much into it, but we are being literally faced with that choice right now. Are we going to pick a feminine candidate in the United States? What does that look like? How do we decide that? How is it going to play out? No matter what side of the aisle you're on, that's what we're facing right now. And it's this dichotomy between the way things have been done in the United States for a very long time and a completely polar opposite. There's no denying that they are completely at odds with each other. Yeah. And I think it's interesting when we look at this from the South and North nodes. The North provides healing for the South node, but that doesn't mean everything from the South node is terrible and wrong. There are some parts of it that are beneficial. But it also pushes us out of our comfort zone. People are especially where I live in rural Arkansas, people are very uncomfortable here with the offer of the North Node right now.
I bet.
Yeah. And it's interesting to watch and play out. I used to be very involved in politics. And at this point, I'm like, I'm hands off.
That's fascinating. Like, I'm in Canada, but I'm so... I don't know why this particular presidential race is so fascinating to me. I can't look away.
Yeah. It's just like watching a train wreck almost sometimes.
It is.
You gotta hand it to Kamala Harris's social media team, though. They are really like nailing it, and I love it.
They're killing it. They've got some Gen Zs on the whole social media.
Amazing.
Her TikTok is awesome.
Yeah, watching it from another country, because I lived in France in 2008, which was really interesting, like to watch from afar. Like observing the United States is such an interesting experience that if you haven't lived abroad and you're American, you don't really understand. Of like, I was in a call a couple days ago with a group of manifestors, which if you're a manifestor, the manifestor community with Holly is fabulous and you should join. And we were talking about the energy of the United States, and that like the United States is this energy that like goes through these cycles. It will get super obsessed with something and then poof, it's like it never happened. And we just move on collectively. And other countries don't do that, but it has to do with the unique human design of the United States. Like if you look at its birth time, I can't remember exactly what she said, but I was so interested in this of like, the news cycles in the United States are like that. Oh, it was about the emotional wave. That's what it is. Okay. The emotional wave in the United States is a collective wave. So there's three different types of emotional waves in human design. You've got the collective, the tribal, and I forget the first one, but it's like how it's informed by the outside world, basically, and how dramatic it is. So the collective wave is like existential crisis, fall to the bottom. Like it's this big movement. That is my collective wave. So I totally resonate with it. That I'm like, when I need to make a decision, it is like, okay, I got to get up to this decision, existential fall every time. And the United States follows that same path. So from the outside, it looks like absolutely bonkers that the United States just goes like, we had the trend of cucumbers recently on TikTok. Cucumbers were sold out like everywhere. Cucumbers now, easy to get a hold of. People have moved on.
Oh, and celery juice was really big for a while too.
Yeah. It's just amazing.
I never thought to look into the human design of a country based on its birth date and time. Oh man, new rabbit holes are opening.
Yeah, it's like if you hang out with me enough, I will just direct you to 1,000 rabbit holes that I've already explored.
Awesome.
That's what I love. I'm a rabbit holey person.
My brain is going a million miles an hour just with all this information.
I love it.
It's so fascinating.
It is.
So, what got you into the lunar nodes and tarot? How did you get on that
spirit
track?
Guides were just like, let's go. Sometimes it's interesting, like how these things happen. So as I mentioned before, they kept saying like you reap what you sow, and I was like seeing the Justice card, and then I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, this seems related to this time of year. Is the Libra card have to do with, or not the Libra card? Does the Justice card, like I didn't know it had an association with Libra at this point in time. I was like, we're about to be in Libra season. This seems like correlated. My husband is a Libra rising, so I kind of know a little, I have like a leg up on it. And so then in Googling, I was like, oh, okay, this is this time of year, like the autumn equinox coordinates with the Justice card. Those are a correspondence. What other correspondences are out there in terms of timing? And then I found the Deccan system and how that coordinates with the tarot system, and just kind of went from there. And that's how it works for me, of like, I'm like, I wonder, or my spirit guides bring me something and I'm like, oh, look at that. Let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's see what's down there. I want to inspect that. So like that's kind of what I did with channeling. It just happened spontaneously. So how I started channeling was I thought I was going to become an energy healer and do energy healing. I was like, this is it. Decided to give away free sessions to my friends, test it out, start cultivating a client base. I was like, yeah, this is my future, after being burnt out at my marketing agency. Couldn't get a single friend to decide to do it. They were like, that sounds great. And I would send them the link to sign up. They'd never do it. And so my husband at the time was doing energy work with my own energy healer, because that's where I learned it from, and had been working in a very intimate container with her for about 2 years at that point. And previous to this, like I was not a woo-woo person. I was very intellectually minded. And he had a block that was like really difficult. And she's like, why don't you just practice on him? If you like working on him and his energy, you'll be fine. If you can clear this block, you will be amazing. It's like, okay, I'll give it a go. And it would just not move. Like no matter how much energy I brought in, it wasn't budging. And I thought to myself, I really wish there was someone here to help me with this. They could like watch what I'm doing energetically and give me pointers. And then I felt this really strong, powerful, wonderful energy come in. I was like, oh, well, maybe this is the energy I need. I'm going to bring it into my body. Next thing I know, I'm full on voice channeling.
Wow.
And that's the first time I voice channeled. And I was like, what in the world is this? Like, it felt intuitive, but I'm a semi-conscious trance channel at this point now, which means I'm awake. I know what's going on. I don't go into full deep trance state. I think it's healthier and safer to do it that way, which is just my 2 cents. But at that point, and I was like, what just happened? And he's like, oh, this was a continuation of a conversation I was having with my spirit guides. I was like, oh, wow, that just blew my mind. And then I went down the rabbit hole of learning how to channel. I have probably one of the most comprehensive collections of channeling books in the United States at this point, because they're really hard to get a hold of. A lot of them are out of print, because the people that were like, channeling was really popular in the 80s and 90s. And people were like literally selling these books out of their back of their car. So some of them are hard to get. So I went and just assembled this, like, I've probably got like 50 or 60 books on channeling. And I read the vast majority of them. I found a teacher to work with, started attending her channeling school, then found another teacher because I was like, I need more, and still study underneath her. And that's how I learned how to do channeling, and then started teaching other people at that point because I was like, this needs to be shared with the world. And so for like the first segment of what I was doing, then I got to where I am now. I was teaching people how to channel. I made a course. I did a group coaching program about how to learn how to connect with your spirit guides and do the what I call external channeling, where your guides outside of you and you're talking to them versus like voice channeling. For our listeners, voice channeling is not what you want to approach first. I'm rare, and my spirit guides have let me know that that is because I was a voice channeler in a past lifetime. That's why it came supernatural to me. It was a very seamless and easy process, which is very surprising to me. Like, it shocked me, to be honest, because usually things in my life, I really have to do like a full deep dive and like really work on it. So I was like, what is this? I like this. This is nice.
I can relate. Yeah, because the voice channeling came really easily to me as well. And it actually happened through my YouTube channel. So I started out doing scripted videos and it just felt weird. So one day I just meditated and asked for my guides to come in and help me. And I just asked for an idea and then I asked them to kind of guide the video. And I turned it on and I just started speaking and it just flowed. And as soon as the message was done, I forgot what I said. So I had to watch
Yep,
it back.
totally. I'll
And
have
then you put
sessions
it
with
out there.
clients and like I'm like, so what do we talk about? Like I kind of got the gist of it, but there are details that are lost. Like I get the general meaning most of the time. And I work in particular, I use the doorkeeper method, which is when you have one particular guide. His name is Monty. And I work with him, and then he will like deliver a message to people when I do a session with them to get us kicked off that he has already talked to their spirit guide team. And then if we do Q&A style, just like Abraham Hicks Bashar, like most channels do. And then if there's a question that he's like, there's someone on your spirit guide team that's going to answer it way better than I could, let me go get them. He changes places with them. And from the channeler perspective, like I can feel him leaving, I can feel the next energy coming in, the differences of it. Sometimes my voice will change depending on like how that spirit guide really wants to represent themselves. And that learning to do that was definitely a process of deep surrender, because in my logical mind I'm like, okay, this is nuts. My voice is changing. What the heck? Is this just my subconscious like trying to try on different personalities? Like, what is this? And until I really got to the point where I was allowing the spirit guides to prove to me that this was real while I was doing it for people, that like one of the first sessions that I did this whole process. I brought in a spirit guide from someone's team who is a practicing witch, and she was asking about a particular ritual. And the spirit guide gave her this like super detailed ritual to do. I don't know anything about it, so I'm like, I don't know what any of this means, but talk specifically about using a purple candle. I was like, okay, this is interesting. As soon as we were done channeling, she let me know, the sitter was like, yeah, I just bought a purple candle earlier this morning. Like, I just had this feeling to go buy one, and now I have all the supplies to do this right now.
Wow.
And that was when I was like, okay, this is legit, because I didn't know any. I'm not a witchcrafty person, so I really didn't know any of the different things and the correspondences, all of that. And she's a very skilled practitioner and knows her stuff. And she's like, yeah, this was spot on, and I have this stuff. It's like, oh, that's amazing.
That is amazing. And oh, wow. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. It seems like the energy work is kind of just the portal to your gifts. Because I went through, yeah, like Reiki training, but as soon as I did my first distance session, all the protocols went out the window. And all of a sudden, I was making contact with people's guides and passed on loved ones, and all this stuff's happening. I'm just like, okay. And it's clairvoyant for me. And yeah, I'm still kind of just finding my footing with what's actually happening. But I've been yeah, just getting those confirmations is really helpful because went through the same thing. I'm like, am I just making this stuff up? Like,
Yeah.
am I losing it? Is this my imagination? But when you deliver the message and then you get the confirmation back, things that seemed really random to me were really significant for the sitter.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
It blows your mind. It
it
blows your mind because
does.
you're like, where did this even come from at first? And then you kind of get into this like cadence where it just feels normal, where you're used to that level of connection that you're like, I don't know, it just happens.
Yeah.
But for our listeners right now, like who are new to working with their spirit guides and maybe can't have that connection to speak with them, what I always say is that you want to do a sign and ask them to give it to you at least 3 times and be really strict about that because that removes the logical process of like, well, maybe that's just a coincidence. It's really hard to get a unicorn 3 times within a 24-hour period. Like we can all admit that, unless you're hanging out with like preschool girls that have a lot of like, well, they don't use Lisa Frank anymore, but aging myself again.
Love Lisa Frank.
Yeah, I mean, it was the bomb. But, unless you're around an atmosphere, you're going to see 3 unicorns. Like, I'm not going to see 3 unicorns, and I could ask for them. And if it's, in correspondence, they're going to show up. And what we always have to remember is just because we don't receive a sign doesn't mean our spirit guides aren't there. It just means it wasn't the right time, or the answer is no.
Yeah.
So what I always tell people, like when they're interested in working with their spirit guides and they don't yet know like what to do, just ask them for some random thing, like whatever pops in your head first. Ask them to show that to you at least 3 times within either a 24, 48, or 3-day period. Pick whatever feels right to you. I will say though, if you have a habit of like you work at home and you never leave home, spirit guides want you to know they need opportunities to show you stuff. This is one of the things spirit guides will tell me often of like, if you don't scroll social media, if you're at home and you're not really doing a whole lot and you're just hanging out, there's not a lot of ways for them to get stuff to you. So you do have to like do your part of the bargain is to give them the opportunity to show you signs, but then like hold them accountable. Spirit guides have to work to get us signs. It's not just like they snap their fingers and it shows up. It requires them to take action and use their energy. And not all spirit guides can do that. That's the other thing we have to remember. Not all spirit guides are capable of channeling and talking to us. Not all spirit guides are capable of making signs manifest in physical reality. Those are skills. They have to work on that. It's not a given. And my spirit guide Monty that I work with, I love him that like I had a channeling school in physical and he has a channeling school for spirit guides, and that's part of his soul mission and what he's working on right now. So he's working with spirits and teaching them how to actually do that. Like what's the process? Because we think about it this way of like our energy is down here. I always say like we're ice, right? We're solid form. They are water vapor. We can't see them, but we can feel them. We know that they're there. If it's like, just like if it's really humid, there's a lot of water vapor, we know it's humid. Just like if you're in tune with your intuitive senses, you can feel your spirit guides. Same deal. We have to get to the point where we are liquid water to be able to talk to them. We got to be in this state of flow. They have to step their energy down to meet us as well. They can't be vibrating at their highest frequency. So the most skilled channelers are ones that can really raise their vibration, because that's through our consciousness, not just like our physical bodies. Raise it to the point where we can get to the point that it's the lowest point where those spirits can step down. So that's why people who are really skilled at channeling and bringing through lots of different types of beings are usually really good at raising their energy. The corollary is they need to also be very grounded people. This is where you get channelers that they are so up here and so like into the unseen that they have, the Luna Lovegood problem. They don't make sense to us. Like they may be able to see the stuff that we're like, okay, don't understand that. And they come across as crazy because they're so ungrounded. So that's the other part of like being a really skilled channeler. You got to do the energy work to lift your energy up, but also get really, really grounded through energetic grounding, not just like going out and standing outside with your feet on the ground. That's one method of grounding, but really true energetic grounding, your body feels like it's a puddle of mud when you do it correctly.
Yeah.
And that's you really have to master those energy skills. And I think that's, to your point, where we have to get to being really good practitioners is through energy work. Our logic can only go so far. Just like when we're looking at these tarot cards, we can look at the symbols, we can understand the iconography, we can study the history of the tarot and all the hidden meanings of it. But ultimately, the best tarot readers are ones that are seeing things that are not on the cards. They're using their intuition. And that's when it really like hits home and you're like, oh my gosh, this was amazing. That's where it really comes down to for us.
Was a mic drop moment. Thank you for sharing that too. It's so important to be grounded when we're doing this work. I think a lot of people get so focused on the upper chakras raising their vibration, and then we're like balloons in the wind. We
I
get
love that
pulled in any
analogy.
kind of direction.
And I think we're predicated to that because we have modeling and conditioning that we're a logical world anyway. So we're already up here. Our energy wants to reside up here. We're not a very physical world anymore. And we actually like say like doing manual labor, that's beneath me. You know, we have those attitudes of like really discrediting artisans or manual labor workers that we, through our conditioning and our habits in society, we think that the energy being up here in our work is so much more valuable. So when a energy practitioner is ungrounded, they are just repeating that same conditioning pattern that they haven't really worked on. That's how that's showing up in their work.
I never thought of it that way. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, and there's a really big difference between conditioning and trauma. Those aren't the same, just to clarify for people. Those are very different. Trauma is too much, too soon, too fast. And conditioning is a belief that things should be a certain way. So if we come into energy work thinking subconsciously even that we should be using our brains and this energy up here, then we're neglecting the complete lower half of our energetic system that connects us to the earth, to grounding energies. There's a reason why we're on earth in particular. Our souls choose to be here on this planet in this time.
Well, it makes sense why talk therapy can only get you so far too. In healing trauma, you've got to get back into your body.
And that was my problem. And why I started off with spirituality is I went to therapy and I was such an over intellectualizer. It did not work to the point that like my therapist was like, oh my gosh, Kim, oh my gosh, Kim, oh my God, you've had all these experiences and like you clearly understand them, but I don't know how to help you process this. Like talking isn't helping. I'm like, okay. And then I eventually learned after getting into spirituality, there's lots of different types of therapy beyond talk therapy. And I wish I had discovered somatic therapy earlier on in my journey. I think it would have been so profound, but it's a type of therapy that we don't, just in the same way that we prioritize CBT style therapy, we deprioritize somatic therapy, nervous system regulation. That's starting to change. Thank you, TikTok algorithm. But we're starting to become more aware of our nervous system and how our parasympathetic nervous system can really impact the way that we engage with the world. Whereas before, like, that's not something that psychotherapists even remotely thought about, 70 years ago. It wasn't really something that was even on their radar.
Right. Well, there's getting to be more and more space and acceptance for the whole gamut of emotions too, and how our body vents and expresses. Whereas like I don't remember ever really talking about feelings growing up.
No,
ever.
You wouldn't say I feel this way. You'd be like, okay, that's your problem.
Yeah.
No, and I grew up in like a more hippy dippy family too. Like I grew up in a Christian church, but we were like the light, love, and rainbows church, and like was very emotional, and like, my parents were both, really great people. But my mom works in a physical field. She's a physical therapist, and yet did exactly the same thing of like, I didn't work with my hands or my body. I went straight into the intellectual stuff that my dad was doing, and saw that as like, well, that's the path where I can make more money, so I better go that direction in my life. And I'm also predicated to that. I'm definitely more of an up here person than a down here person. But yeah, it's interesting and different. I think the approach in our childhood of how we handle emotion makes such a difference. And I, not as a mother myself, but like can see the moms now and the dads now like really trying to get their kids to be able to process their own emotions.
Yeah.
And I give them such credit because that is such hard work to be able to just, yeah, okay, toddler, just let it out. Whereas when we were kids, it was like, shush, get it together. Here is a lollipop or a sticker to get you to stop. Here's something to displace that. And it works. There's a reason why Disney World gives out stickers to kids that are having temper tantrums. That's like one of their secrets of how they keep the parks a good place. That's the behavior, right? And so then as we grow up, we do the same thing of creating these coping mechanisms. Mine was scrolling, doom scrolling. When I realized that was my coping mechanism, that when I felt uncomfortable feelings, I would entertain myself. It's like, oh, that's a problem.
For me too.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do that. Of like every single one of us just replace the stickers and lollipops with something else. We don't want to feel those uncomfortable feelings. And I love the analogy that it's only 90 seconds. I don't think that's actually true. Like sometimes those really big emotions take a lot longer. Like grief does not last 90 seconds. I'm sorry. Yeah. And I think that is a social media trend that I've seen quite a lot of, like feel the emotion only takes 90 seconds. It's like, no, some of those difficult emotions can take years to process. They can take years. And I think we have to own it of like, it's not, while we can replace it with a 90-second behavior of scrolling, sometimes it's much harder and we have to create systems of support to be able to do that. Of like when you lose a loved one, we don't talk about that as a society. We just goodbye in your grief. Good luck with that.
Seriously. And I think in the moment, an emotional wave can come up and through you quickly, but that's not going to be the end of it.
Yeah.
Especially with grief. And if you've got suppressed grief or any kind of suppressed emotion, you can have that wave, but there's so many, what's causing the wave? What's underneath the wave? That's where we have to get. It's scary to dive that deep, though.
It really is. I mean, it's absolutely petrifying, and I, in particular, will avoid it. Like, I know I do. I will own that. Michael Singer's work really helped me a lot with that, of just understanding that my emotions are my problem. Like, they're not anybody else's problem. I can try to take those emotions and make them somebody else's problem, but they're really not. They're on me, and it's because I've taken an energy into me that I really need to get rid of in some way. And when he talks about it, and this analogy is something that, like, when I start feeling this way of like I don't want to deal with my stuff, he says if I could just take you out of the world for a minute and just pluck you out, everything that you're worried about right now, everything that's making you feel a certain way is still going to keep happening whether or not you're there. The world is going to keep turning. You're just one little person thinking all this stuff is so dramatic, and you've internalized all of that, and it's become part of your psyche, part of your narrative. And when you can really just pluck yourself out of it, you can get a reality check, basically, is his methodology of like thinking through that. And his analogy I love so much is we are all a bird with wet wings on a lake, and we want to try to fly. So we're flapping those wings and we're like, we're going to drown. And it creates waves. And what we instead have to do is lift our wings out of the water and just let it dry. And once we relax enough and we stop flapping and we just trust that we're going to be okay, even though the water could be really tumultuous, just drying those wings off in the sunlight, then we can actually fly out of our stuff. But you have to stop and you have to relax. And you have to trust. Yeah, it's heavy. It's a heavy thing. Because then I think about, a lot of this advice comes from cisgendered white men. And we can't deny that. Of like, okay, you're an abused wife. You're just going to relax into that and it's going to be okay.
No kidding.
And that's where we get into like the really rough, difficult stuff of human life. Like we can't use spiritual bypassing to get around that. And we also can't say, okay, she chose fully and completely to be in that.
And that's not something that you can get over in a couple months.
No, that takes years of unpacking that trauma from that.
Yeah. And to be able to get to a point where you can actually relax after that kind of trauma.
You may never be able to get there in your life.
Yeah.
And I think spirituality in many ways does a disservice. Like, it's trying to apply things for every day to everything. And I think it's much more complicated. I think being human is much more complicated than we would like to say. Like, my spirit guides say all the time, like, being a human is really, really hard. It's harder than being in spirit.
Yeah.
Your soul chose to be here, but also know you chose a hard path. It's not going to always be easy. Yeah. Heavy stuff sometimes. But at the end of the day, you know, I really love my spirit guides, even though they tell me hard stuff like that. It's realizations that also give me a lot of solace of like, yeah, it is really freaking hard. Right? Like, it's okay that this is a struggle for me because it's a struggle. I chose struggle.
Yeah.
And I can choose again, and I can choose to not struggle so much on the things that I can control. I can try to work with my nervous system. I can make different choices about how I'm interacting with the world. But ultimately, there are forces that are a lot bigger than us that are coming into play that we also have to be mindful of. Like, we are in this time and place, and like, we don't have control over all this stuff. And like, sometimes it's going to create scenarios that are really, frankly, downright horrible. Yeah. And it's okay that that's hard as humans to deal with, whether you're experiencing it or you're just looking from the outside. It's an experience.
The human experience. I think that's important for everyone, is to learn to embrace all of it.
Yeah.
All of the experience, and not try to, I feel like that's where the spiritual bypassing can get really dangerous, is constantly trying to get to the ups, to the positive emotions, to the positive experiences, and thinking that that's the pinnacle, where that just trains us to suppress ourselves.
Yeah, and it really comes from this concept of being goal-oriented.
Yeah.
Which isn't the point. We're not here to achieve anything in particular. I mean, that would be awesome if we could, each one of us came into this life with like, you are meant to achieve X. Good luck. We're going to support you in your mission. How about it?
Right.
It would be awesome.
That would be awesome, especially for intellectuals. Give me that checklist.
Right. I need the little checklist to go through to tell me what I'm supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
And where we're coming from, this idea of like being outcome oriented is really in the Industrial Revolution. Right? That's where this is a new belief in human history. It's not been around that long, really, of like everyone had a particular outcome that they were working for. In ancient history, there were people that worked towards a particular outcome, but there were people who just like, they existed. They were farmers. The only outcome that they really wanted was survive to next year.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting, like looking at how the industrialization has led to spiritual bypassing. Like, those go one to one, the relationship between the two of those. And when we start making our lives about outcomes, we get so much more out of it. We get so much more enjoyment.
We really do.
And it's more about the experiences that we choose to have, the experiences that we're aiming towards having, without regard to the outcome. Like right now, coming into this podcast interview, I'm like, this is going to be a great experience. I could have come into it how I used to would have come into it. I'm going to manipulate this conversation in such a way that I can talk about my talking points so I can sell my stuff. That's being outcome oriented, right? And it can really dictate our entire approach to our lives. I'm going to try to control all these bits and bobs so I can get to the outcome that I want. Whereas instead, if we approach it from, what is the experience I'm going to cultivate? Because no matter what's going on, you can dictate your experience of it. In most cases, there are obvious exceptions, But I think it's very interesting, like when we start to think about it from an experience perspective, even really horrible stuff, we can change how we experience it. And this is a difficult and at times can be very bypassing of a concept, but there is a mystic in Australia whose name evades me at the moment. Ashira? No, something like that. I'll have to get it for you. But she was violently attacked. And during that moment, she chose to unconditionally love her attacker and had a moment of absolute enlightenment. And it was when she was very young. I think she was like 14, 15, 16 years old when it happened, to the point that her attacker stopped in that moment, apologized, and ran away. She was injured, though, went into a coma for, I think, 2 or 3 months. And then like had to heal and all of that, but just in that moment decided, I'm just going to forgive this guy for what he's doing to me. And that dictated her experience. Even though this horrible thing was happening to her, she chose to have a different experience of what was happening. And that's a really tough thing to think about, of like, okay, in these moments in our lives that are so hard, so traumatic, to have the conscious ability to select a different experience is an amazing thing. Like, I'm not sure that I could do that. Actually, I know I couldn't, honestly. I know I wouldn't be able to. And it's interesting because then, like, the Dalai Lama's people found her. She became like part of like the anointed priesthood, and now shares this message of love and forgiveness. Wow. And eventually, my favorite part of the story is, though, is like she's healed. She's moved to a different place years and years and years later. And she sees her attacker on the street. And she's like, what do I do about this? Do I turn him in? Like, he's been on the lam for 15, 20 years. She decides ultimately to turn him in, to hold him accountable, because her logic of it and her feeling is we have laws in place that are human for a reason. And I need to maintain those laws. Versus this, the more spiritual perspective is, I've forgiven you completely, go live your life. And it's interesting how she, like, that was an interesting balance of those ethical questions that we can get into. It was very interesting for me. And it's in those questions that I see the most difficulty for spirituality, and where people tend to, like, we either want to not engage with it completely and we're like, nope, I'm not going there. It's too difficult. I'm not gonna. Or it's where our belief starts to fall apart. It takes a strong understanding and faith and belief to see stories like that and be like, yep, this is the way. This is the path for me. And even more if you have those sorts of experiences in your life.
I like that she held him accountable.
Me too. Because women often don't,
Right. For that reason, I'll just be forgiving and let it go. But even you were doing this with your hands, it kind of brings it back to the both and, like acknowledging that something horrendous happened to you, but also that story doesn't have to dictate your life. And yes, we can forgive people, but it's also important to hold them accountable when they're acting in vicious ways, because otherwise, how does anyone learn? I don't know where that just came from, but
it's interesting. Yeah. And I have personal experience with that. And this is not something I super talk about a lot because I don't want it to be a core part of my story. But in December of 2021, I took an antibiotic, just a single dose of ciprofloxacin. And within 15 minutes, I couldn't move my hands. And for about the next 4 weeks, I couldn't walk. I was bedbound. And it is a very serious antibiotic that is banned in a lot of countries. In the United States, they have a black box warning on it. And it wasn't like the universe did not provide me with ample opportunity to not take this. And my intuition in the moment was like screaming out, do not take that pill. And I literally turned to my husband and I said, here goes nothing. And I popped it in my mouth and took it. Should have listened, but to myself, to trust myself, that I was like, well, the doctors must know more than me, right? that, which is not my habit. Like, I'm not a person that would ever do that. But at that point, I was like at my rock bottom in terms of self-confidence, because was just reaching max levels of burnout in my business. Not neglecting that some people take significantly more doses. Most people have a reaction after they've had like 7 to 14 doses of it. Some people will take it for like 20, 30 days. It's what they used to treat anthrax. It's not a you should mess around sort of antibiotic.
Whoa.
And I remember the very first time when I was finally able to get up out of bed enough to take a shower. And it was such a painful, physically painful experience because it affected my entire nervous system. I had neuropathy in both of my feet to the point it was like constant pins and needles, burning pain. My tendons were like glass. And like one of the most common things that people have when they take that antibiotic is that they rupture their Achilles tendon. That's how most people have it, especially runners. And just remember like standing in the shower being like, I can let this take me down. I can choose that this experience that I am in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I never heal. I try to chase after the doctor who prescribed this to me. I try to get this taken off the market, fight that good fight. Like, I'm not saying it's not a good fight to fight. And there are people for whom that is their calling and what they should be doing, but it wasn't mine. Mm-hmm. And I said, you get to pick right now. That do you want to experience that, or do you want to experience healing? Do you want to experience getting back out there and not being in a wheelchair? And obviously that's not accessible for everyone that goes through like a traumatic sort of health incident like that. Some people never get back up again. And it's not a matter of choice always of pursuing one or the other. Sometimes those doors are just closed and we have to be honest about that. Sometimes you have a medical accident and that's it. And you're really irreparably changed and you can't go back. And there are certain things like I can't go back. I have to eat really specific diet. I can't have caffeine or alcohol. Like, there are certain things now that I can never probably do. I may never be able to run again. I'm working on it, but that just may not be in the cards for me. And so it's things like that like we get to experience how we're going to deal with those experiences, even if we are wheelchair bound for the rest of our lives. We get to choose how we want to view that, how we want to internalize that, the story that we tell ourselves about it.
So true. Mm-hmm. I have nothing to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to follow up. You know, I almost died from it. But that's usually how the conversation goes, to be honest, where I'm like, yeah, this thing happened. People are like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, just don't take it.
I know. Oh God. Usually I'm that person. People are just like, what the fuck? How are you even still like smiling? How are you still alive? I'm like,
yeah,
I wanted to be here still.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that like we can't, while that's on the one hand, like we also can't forget there are things like chemical imbalances in people's brains. You know, it's so much more complicated than we want to, like it's back to your yin and yang. It's not black and white. It's a mixture of both and all the time. And we have to remember that, which means that we have to not only forgive ourselves when we can't choose a better experience for ourselves, we also have to forgive those around us for whom that is inaccessible for one reason or another.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of love to be able to consistently do that. But also really strong boundaries too. How much are you going to show up for the people in your life? And when is it too much? There's so much to unpack. Like I'm not going to say I can't wait till I'm old, but I'm looking forward to being the old wizened woman that has like all this wisdom, like I'm just going to sit there drinking my tea and everyone's just like, what? I love the TikTok face filter, you know, where you can see what you're going to look like when you're older. And I'm like, man, she is ballin'. Like,
right.
Yes. It'll be cool.
It'll be interesting to look back.
I think it's interesting. Our brain chemistry changes, like literally how we think is different once we enter that age, because our hormones are different. So we actually, like, our personalities, like, quite literally change. The way we view the world changes. And what a magical thing that, like, our bodies are designed in this way that, like, we can see all this shit from our younger years and we're like, what was I doing there? And I'm a line 6 human design. Like, Yeah, I can already see that. All those mistakes I made because they say a line 6 is a line 3 until their Saturn returns. So everything that you did up until that point was a mistake. It didn't matter if it was aligned or not, it went terribly.
No.
Someone told me that, and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Because about when I turned like 30, things started to turn around. But I'm like in my baby stage as a 6 right now. I'm like to that time of my life, and I'm processing all the things I did when I was younger. And I was like, what were you even thinking? Like, wow, good for her. She had so much energy and drive. Not that I don't now, but like, who were you?
Oh man, I love it. Kim,
What a
thank you so much.
far-reaching conversation. Yeah.
It was, but I loved it. I know we scratched the surface of a lot. We did some deep dives, but also there's just so much that
There
we can
is.
explore.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My little encyclopedic brain comes to the rescue very often too. I love it. I love the way my mind works. It took me a long time to really appreciate that, but it
That's
makes
fun.
conversations like this so much fun and so enjoyable. And so I hope everyone that's listening also really enjoyed this. Let me
Yeah.
know, people listening. Send me a
Yeah.
message on Instagram.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Kim. This was an amazing conversation. So many rabbit holes. I'm going to look up some of these books as well.
Yeah.
And for the people who are interested in looking you up, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can find me. My name is Kim Charlson. It is spelled Charlson. No T, no E. So they can find me on pretty much most of the major platforms. I'm on Instagram. TikTok is where I hang out the most, though. And then I'm also on Threads. And then they can find me at kimcharlson.com. And if they're interested in the Tarot Deccan's course, they'll have to check my link in bio. And they should follow me on TikTok so that way I can get 1,000 followers. So I can finally have a link in bio over there. Otherwise, they can find it on my Instagram profile. So if this discussion on tarot and astrology, just like they feel the bug biting them, I hope they decide to join me. And there's also, as part of it, we're doing a live energy healing session. I bet it will have happened by the time that this podcast gets released, though. But it'll be as available as a replay because I do, as a foundational part of everything, we can over intellectualize, but we got to do the energy work, right? I love doing my energy work in tandem with astrology. I think it's really powerful. And we can do a whole thing about how I coordinate that and do my own energy work with the seasons and how that all that works. Oh, so much fun.
Ooh, maybe that'll be the next one.
It'll be my pleasure. This has been a wonderful experience. It's been a divine pleasure to do this. It's really been wonderful.
And so great to have you and to spend some time. Thank you so much.